After co-hosting the biggest competition in women's sport, Australia was at the centre of the footballing world earlier this year. But soccer down under isn't just about getting behind your country. Despite the long distances and time difference, there's plenty of support for clubs in Europe too. Hello there and welcome to Football Now from Sydney, Australia. Now this country's had football fever ever since the FIFA Women's World Cup kicked off earlier this year. So on this week's episode of the show, we thought we'd take a look at what it's like to support some of Europe's biggest clubs from down under. Now this city is an average of 8 hours ahead of the rest of Europe, meaning some of those big matches sometimes fall on somewhat inconvenient times. But it's all part of the experience of being a football fan when your club is over 15,000 kilometres away.
Yeah, so even though you're on the other side of the world, there's still an extremely passionate fan base. It's not quite the same as supporting the team locally. It's different and it's in our own sort of unique way. So whether that's like, your big clubs like Manchester United, Liverpool, Celtic and Rangers in Scotland, and even La Liga clubs, Real Madrid, Barcelona, all have huge pockets of support. Even though you are on the other side of the world, I don't think that necessarily detracts from people's fandom. It's just supporting it in a different way and supporting it the best way you can when you're half the world away.
Now, despite being thousands of miles away, the passion for the fans here down under is obvious. The success of the FIFA Women's World Cup at stadiums like this one earlier this year proved that there is still a huge appetite for the sport here. For many fans, they may never get the chance to see their team play in Europe, but they are still vitally important to the club's success.
So yeah, we've seen with the advent of the Premier League, but also in the last few years that it's not just the match-going fans that are of vital importance to clubs. That is now that they have these big global footprints, and whether that's in the Americas or Australia or in Asia, clubs appeal to people all around the world. They're big brands. Having these clubs that people can support, whether they have ties to their homeland or not, is of vital importance for these teams all across Europe.
Now, former Socceroos captain Craig Foster knows all about football in Europe, having played in the Premier League for Crystal Palace and Portsmouth. He says getting more local fans to support their domestic clubs is the next step for Australian football.
We know here in Australia that support for, the big clubs, Liverpool and Manchester City and mainly Manchester United and others, like much of Asia, is immense. And the problem that countries like ours have is that, and we see this across Asia in many areas, is that support is so big that it can dwarf the local domestic competition. And it can be difficult for the domestic competition to compete with that fan base. Because if you're watching Liverpool every week, it's very different to watch a domestic competition. And because we don't have, 50, 100 years of history in our own domestic clubs, we're still trying to build that. So the challenge that the game has in Australia is to translate fandom and support for football, Socceroos, Matildas, Champions League, EPL, La Liga, into people in the stadia, memberships for our domestic competition.
Well, it might be approaching midnight here in Sydney, but that hasn't stopped a number of hardcore Liverpool fans coming to support their team. So let's head over the road and inside to Cheers to meet some of them.
Come on, Liverpool!
Woo! I support Liverpool Football Club. This is Cheers Bar. It's basically the hub for Liverpool supporters to come and watch the game. It's kind of like Anfield away from Anfield. It's just where the supporters come together and sing the song "You Never Walk Alone" and support the team.
It's a superb atmosphere. All the supporters can mix. It's completely different to being back in England, where you would not be able to mix like this.
The late starts are a real killer. When it comes to work, it's a lot of 2 hour, 3 hour sleeps, waking up at 12, 1 a.m. It's pretty hard, but we love it.
So we heard from Craig Foster earlier, but he isn't the only Australian to have played in Europe. There have been plenty of high-profile players who have made waves on the continent. Brett Emerton was Oceania's Footballer of the Year in 2002 and enjoyed successful spells at Feyenoord of the Netherlands and Blackburn Rovers in England, making 339 appearances during his time in Europe. Mark Schwarzer is widely perceived as one of the greatest Australian players of all time and one of the few to win the Premier League. He was part of the Leicester squad that defied the odds in 2016 to lift the title, after also having long stints at Middlesbrough and Fulham. Tim Cahill is an Everton cult hero after making 226 appearances on Merseyside. He's now the Chief Sports Officer of Qatar's Aspire Academy in Doha. And not forgetting Harry Kewell, who spent the most successful part of his career in Europe across the park from Cahill at Anfield. Kewell is, to this day, the only Australian to win the Champions League after picking up a medal in 2005 with Liverpool, and in 2012 was recognised as Australia's greatest ever footballer by the general public. Yeah, some names in the past in there, and with the way that the Matildas performed at the World Cup, there's plenty to be excited about for Aussie fans in the future too. That is it from me in Sydney and the team back in Doha. Do let us know your thoughts at home using the hashtag FootballNowDownUnder, and we'll see you at the same time next week. Bye for now.